Seth, I'm curious, what is the difference in the writer's room between a busy news day and a slow news day? Is there any such thing as a slow news day?
Yeah, I was going to say that might be the core issue with the question. You know, ultimately, the Closer Look team is a smaller group of people, so that scramble is a little, it's sort of, a tight group of people that you can tell something massive is happening in the news because that's where the papers are flying off that desk. And then the monologue team is ultimately trying to chase having one or two jokes in there because you can add a monologue joke a lot later than you can change a closer look. But ultimately and sadly, because so many things happen late in the day, I think we've gotten pretty good at reacting to them quickly. So it never happens in a way where it upsets the whole course of the show.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would normally ask is, what were some highlights or crazy things from this year? But I feel like it's just been so many that maybe I should ask from this week as opposed to this season.
Well, it's funny because there is such an ability for the news out of Washington to be so crazy as to make it hard to remember. So ultimately what stands out for me more as far as memories from the show are things that are outside of the day-to-day politics news. It is things like, White Savior with Amber Ruffin or Game of Jones with Leslie Jones, or the things that, aren't the constant chase to keep up with the mayhem.
We'll talk a little bit about some of those segments that you do outside of a closer look. You mentioned Game of Jones.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, some of the other things you do.
Mostly Game of Jones is just, I don't need to tell anyone who's ever seen it. I am not the star of Game of Jones. I am just someone who is sitting next to the white hot talent of Leslie Jones. But it's been, for us, again, we're not alone in being shows that are fans of Game of Thrones. But I'm very happy that we came up with something unique in a way for us to highlight exactly how funny Leslie is as a fan of things. And it's really nice to have a 10-minute segment on the show where I have to do literally no preparation other than sit next to my friend while she makes jokes.
I wanted to ask you about some of your interviews because obviously there's an election going on.
Sure.
You've had on a lot of candidates. You've also had, obviously you have on a lot of actors and people who are promoting movies. And what I like about your interviews is that it's not sort of the usual late night banter. There's a lot of introspection. There's a lot of hard questions at times. It really feels like you're trying to get to know these people on a deeper level than just what film they're there to promote or their candidacy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What we found about film promotion is ultimately you just want to remind, if you're coming on a show, you want to remind people your movie's coming out. If you show a clip, that's very helpful, but you can't talk that much about a movie that no one in the audience has seen. And so the longer you do these shows, the more you realize there's more strength, or I should say there's more value to coming on the show and just being engaging. And I think that's true whether or not you're trying to sell a movie or whether you're trying to sell a candidacy. And I think the candidates that do the best job at our show are the ones that realize this is a different opportunity than being on CNN or being on Meet the Press. And if you can talk to me in a way that is maybe a little bit more human than that, our audience tends to respond to them.
Is there anyone you've talked to from this last season or even just recently, not just politicians, but actors and such, who have really impressed you as an interview subject?
Neither a politician nor an actor, but Dr. Ruth blew us away. And I know she's, probably had more talk show appearances than I have at this point, and I host one every night. But, someone who is that sharp after such a long career being in the public eye, who can still make an audience hang on every word. Very similar to that is, we had Glenda Jackson, who, again, is doing King Lear every night on Broadway. So you should be incapable of being impressed if someone can do that. That should be the most impressive thing they do. But yet, they come on the show and you just realize, oh, this person is faster on her feet than most young people that I interview. So that, and again, I think the longer you're in show business, the more you respect people who've been in show business for a long time. So it's really nice when those things happen.
I've asked you several years in a row when you were going to host Saturday Night Live, so
Yeah.
you finally did it.
And I really didn't think. I thought you were crazy to ask, and I think enough people dropped out last minute that they had to break glass in case
I was
of
sending those
emergency.
videos on to the production team.
Thank you so much.
Tell us about it.
It was, I keep saying this, but I really thought after 12 and a half years of being a head writer on the show, I knew more about it than anyone, and I could not, there was no unexperienced experience for me to have. And I was so unprepared for what it took to host the show in a really exciting way. You think, oh, there's nothing new for me here. And it was mayhem. It was an emotional roller coaster. It was my least favorite Monday to Friday I'd ever had there, and then my favorite Saturday. Mostly because a host, you have so much less control than I did, I should say, as a head writer. And so I had to cede all this control. But on Saturday, I'd never been that, I'm usually, I would say in my time there, it was in my head. And as a host, I just had no time to be in my head. And so I thought, well, this is just performing on this show is so much fun.
What was the Monday like when you gathered with everybody?
It was funny because, pitch is a little bit, it's not really a pitch. It's more of a fake performance of a pitch. And they all knew that I knew it was bullshit, and yet they still had to do it, and I had to pretend like, oh, these are wonderful ideas that none of you are going to write. But, every part of it was, it was like watching your life from a different perspective. It was like seeing you grow up from your dad's eyes. I was thinking, oh, this is what it looks like from over here. But it was great. It was so, again, I was so flattered they asked, so honored to do it, and it was wonderful.
Favorite sketch or moment on the actual live?
I mean, it was, I really am such a fan of Che and Jost and getting to be back at the update desk, which still, if there's any place of that show that I get a little emotional about being back, it's that desk. And so to be there with them, and I was really grateful that they were so kind as to share that with me that night.
You had one great sketch with Keenan, who won his first Emmy last year.
So happy for him.
Why has he lasted so long on the show? What is it about him that?
Well, it's not even just that he's lasted so long on the show. It's that he did years of sketch work before it. I mean, when you add it up, I don't think there's anyone who's done sketch comedy for as long as he's done it and at the level he's done it. There is that thing, I feel like everyone, no matter what walk of life you are, feels safe around Keenan. You as a performer, he has a real warmth, and it's very inviting, and there's nothing, he doesn't put any walls up, and he just lets you share the joy he has in performing with you. And it's just great. It is, and James Anderson, who writes that sketch, knows how much I love those, because I text him every time I did it. So I felt very happy that I got to be up there with Keenan.
They're submitting you in the guest category.
Yeah.
They don't do that for every host.
I know,
just
I know.
A few.
Yeah.
What would it mean? We're going to talk more late night in a moment. But what would it mean if you were to get nominated and maybe win for guest actor?
I mean, it would really hurt my feelings that after 12 and a half years, I only got it as a guest. No. It would mean a lot. Obviously, it is very kind of them to submit me, and. I think it probably goes without saying how I feel about that show. Ultimately, everything up to and including, my wife that I met through an SNL connection I would not have if it wasn't for that place. So, it all means a lot. And the good news is, even if I don't get nominated, it will not ruin that experience.
Last question for me, and then Zach takes back over. All the years you were on, who was the best? What was the best guest hosting night from somebody else?
There's so many good ones. John Hamm's first show stands out for me because we had such a different expectation based on only knowing him as Don Draper as to what he was going to be, and he was the opposite of that.
Goofy.
He's goofy, but yet he's goofy who can play that, refined alpha, which is such a fun tool to have in comedy, because to be able to puncture that is a really nice thing to be able to do. And I think it was the first time he hosted, a bunch of the Mad Men cast came and
that.
it was a little bit like a mafia family between the two weddings. I remember, a mafia wedding, I should say, between the two families, because that night, even though Mad Men was a show that was filmed out here, it felt like a New York show, and obviously SNL is as well. But I remember that night with not just John, but also Slattery and Elizabeth. It was a really cool night.
I wanted to ask you about Documentary Now.
Thank you.
And I feel like people are really starting to discover this show now because it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
As well. And, talk a little bit about some of the new creative challenges with the third season. I mean, how do you keep it fresh?
Well, we were almost forced to keep it fresh because, for the best reason possible, which was Barry, we didn't have Bill available to us, and we had the show was built around he and Fred's talents for the first 2 years, and yet in the absence of Bill, you think, well, how do you replace him? And you just have to think big, and ultimately, by thinking big, we ended up with Owen Wilson and Michael Keaton and Cate Blanchett, among others, and it was first of all, we're so lucky that those people were willing to give us their time. But it also let us write episodes that we probably wouldn't have written if we were still trying to build it around Fred and Bill. So it was, again, it's all a credit to Reese and Alex who direct the show, but I'm really happy, one, that it continued to exist, because let's be honest, it's very hard to sell hyper-specific documentary parody as a television show, and yet now we've finished 3 and we're going to do a 4th, so it's an incredible gift to have that show.
You mentioned the directors of the show, and every time I rewatch episodes, I just marvel at the attention to detail that you guys put into creating these very hyper-specific recreations of these documentaries, whether it's the Blue Jean Committee or the one with the War Room where Bill's playing Carville and Arneson is Stephanopoulos.
Yeah.
Like, not just the way that they perform, but the camera work, the editing, all of it just kind of works to sell you on that. Can you talk a bit about that?
I mean, it is so nice and comforting to sit down and write them, knowing that if you put in attention to detail to the writing, it will be exponentially increased by what the directors do. And the incredible design team, the people who do the wigs, to the set design, to the wardrobe. I mean, everybody cares very deeply about it, and no one wants to be the department that, is the one that everybody says, everything was right, except that actually wasn't a jacket that was around in 1971. And, ultimately, it does trickle down from the top with Reese and Alex, but, we want to make a show, and it's very hard to make a show that will hopefully, for the people who find it 10 years from now, they will enjoy it as much as people who watched it this year. And there are some people who will be available who haven't seen it in 10 years, because it is not a runaway ratings hit.
What were your favorite episodes from this season?
Waiting for the Artist with Cate Blanchett. I mean, mostly just because Cate Blanchett not only did the show, but brought so much to it. And genuinely, when I say brought things to it, I mean, she had not just ideas, but she had teeth made. So she appreciated what it was we were trying to do, and she didn't want to be the reason that it wasn't up to that quality. And I don't feel particularly comfortable politicking for my own Emmy glory, but I do think Cate Blanchett should win an Emmy for that episode.
You could be the guest actor winners from the previous weekend present together on prime time. So maybe you're arm in arm with her.
That could be great. Yeah, because I don't think she'll be at the Creative Arts. So maybe I'll have to.
Well, I got on to Jimmy Fallon a couple of weeks ago. He's won 6 Emmys and never been there, but they've all been at Creative Arts.
Wow, there you go.
He won twice on the guest actor.
I will say SNL. I won my Emmy at the Creative Arts, and I was there.
You were there.
I was there.
Melania and I. Are you committing now that you would be there if you get nominated?
I like to be a little more coy.
One last question on late night. You haven't been in for a variety series yet. You've been in for variety writing several times.
Yeah.
What would that mean if you could climb into that group and compete there?
I'm really proud of the show, and I think that's the most important thing. What would be really nice is, I'm so proud that we've been nominated for writing, and that means, obviously, identify as a writer, and so it means so much to me. It would be great to be nominated for the show because unlike writing, which honors one part of our show, variety series honors everybody who works at our show, and I just think it would be nice to hear on the day it happened. I feel like everyone would cheer, and that would be a nice sound to hear.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and
Thanks.
congratulations on another great year of all your work.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your time.